All right, students, here we go. This is what we've been waiting for. We've looked at Zimbardo's study on um, social roles and the fundamental attribution error in the prison simulation, and we've looked at Milgram's study on obedience. And now we're going to look at human research ethics. And I have a big red star with an arrow because these are actually really, really important to remember. Any psychological research that is done must be approved by an independent review board. So whether you're at a college or university, or whether you're working for a corporation and you're doing research, there is an independent review board that will review your application following American Psychological Association guidelines that you will find below. So take time if you need to stop and pause and get these down, but these are absolutely essential for you to know and to remember for both the test and for any future research you might do. First of all, informed consent. This means that every participant in a research study needs to be informed of the potential risks they might experience, the discomfort they might experience, unpleasant emotional experiences, etc. So in other words, if you're doing, for example, a prescription drug study for an anxiety medication, you must know what the potential side effects are. If you're participating in a social psychology research study, they can deceive you. They don't have to tell you exactly what they're studying, but they do need to tell you it is possible that you might feel some unpleasant emotional experiences during this study. And you know what? If you don't want to do it, if you don't want to experience discomfort, you don't have to do it. So every research participant has to be voluntary. Now, another point that's important about voluntary participation is, let's say you get started in a research test. Maybe they're looking at like the effects of solitary confinement, and you know what, you're in solitary confinement for like 2 days and you're thinking, I'm going crazy here, I can't do this anymore. You don't have to stay in the study. You can say, I'm done. And in fact, in Phil Zimbardo's prison study, the students there actually were told that they could withdraw at any time, yet they had so gotten lost in their roles as prisoners that they didn't really realize that they could withdraw. When you withdraw, you may have your data withdrawn as well. Number 3, when you are making your application, you need to make an argument for a risk-gain assessment. So, for example, let's go back to an anxiety drug study. If someone is performing a study on an anxiety drug and there are some known side effects, then you need to present in your IRB application why the potential risk why the gain rather exceeds the potential risk. And, you know, maybe one could have made that argument in the Zimbardo prison study or even in Milgram's study on obedience. Perhaps what we did learn about the fundamentals of human nature were important enough that they maybe could have made an argument about that. Though nevertheless, neither of those studies probably would be approved today. You can use deception in your study. So this was done very well in the Litton and Darley study, with the people believing that they were talking about adjustment to college life, when in reality they were looking at how someone would respond to an emergency. You can have deception, but you just have to justify it. You have to say why it's important in your study to use deception. Finally, you have to assure the confidentiality of the results of your study. The anonymity of participants is critical. So when you are reporting your study in a journal or in some other publication, you need to keep the place that you've done the study or any other identifying information anonymous. And this can be hard, especially if you're doing something like a case study where the aspects of the study are so unique. It's hard sometimes to keep research completely confidential, but you really must demonstrate how you plan to do that. And then finally, debriefing of participants. At the conclusion of any study, you need to discuss the results of the experiment with the participants. So first of all, you need to describe with them the nature of the study and why deception was used, if any, and then you need to give them the results of the research. This is interesting. If you go to a large university, such as the University of Minnesota or Madison, or something along that line, there will be many opportunities for you to participate in research. So you just look at the psychology building, and they have ads up all the time for participants. So you can get paid to do this. In fact, my daughter got paid to participate in many studies. But keep in mind that informed consent and voluntary participation are absolutely fundamental to your participation, and that you may indeed withdraw at any time, and that you must get the results at the conclusion of the research. So my recommendation for you is to just memorize all of these, really just work on doing that. Now, we're going to move very quickly through animal research ethics. This particular study is the executive monkey experiment done by Professor Brady. Now, Professor Brady wanted to study whether control of in this case, shock, would lead to stress and stress-related illness. The monkeys were in pairs, and resting under their feet were wires that actually produced a slight shock. One of the monkeys was the executive and could turn off the shock. The other monkey was not the executive and had no control over the situation. Now, I'm not really even going to go into any more detail on this study, because all one has to do is look at the picture and realize that this is clearly not a good use of primates in research. However, a similar research study that was done by Dr. Weiss, who wanted to look at whether predictability reduces stress. In this case, I'm going to show you some apparatus he used that's slightly different than the picture that's here, to measure stress and whether or not one has control.
Rat experiments have taught us that changing circumstances alter the impact of stress, and this knowledge has helped many human victims.
This is an experiment illustrating the effects of control in a stressful situation. What you see here are two animals, one able to control a stress stimulus delivered to its tail, whereas the second animal receives exactly the same stress stimulus. This stimulus will occur every 60 seconds unless the animal, you see here in control, rotates the wheel on the front of its apparatus. If it rotates the wheel after the stimulus has occurred, it will terminate the stimulus. This animal, therefore, has control over the stimulus. The animal in the other cage next to it receives exactly the same stress stimulus, except that animal does not have control over it. That animal receives the stimulus at random, depending on the behavior of this animal. And what this experiment is designed to study are the physiological and neurochemical differences that occur in these animals because one has control as opposed to one having no control. And we now have pretty well established that the animal that does not have control over the stressful stimulus is by and large in much greater danger of developing stomach lesions or ulcers than does the animal that's in control. Another very important factor in stress situations is the factor of predictability. The animal that has predictability develops far less pathology and has far less of an adverse reaction, so to speak, than does the animal that cannot predict. The maximally beneficial situation to be in is one in which one not only has an effective coping or control response, but one also has very good predictability. We can relate that to human situations, and we can simply say that in general, one is better off, one is going to develop less pathology, have a greater sense of well-being, show fewer of these neurochemical changes we've identified with either stress or depression, if one has both control and predictability.
Jerry Weiss there is, his theory of stress was really important in identifying something that we call locus of control and how this affects one's emotional well-being. Now, use of rats and mice in research is very, very common. And if that's something that you have a problem with, it's probably not a field you should go into. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of mice at the University of Minnesota that are used for a variety of testing purposes. Now, let's look at Weiss's results. This is a medium length of gastric lesion. For those who had no predictability of stress, they still did develop a lesion. For those that had a signaled shock and they were able to lessen, or they were able to know what was coming at them, you can see the gastric lesion is at about 2 millimeters. For those who had unpredictable shocks, the gastric lesion was at 10 millimeters. And this is analogous to our own lives as humans. When we have situations that arise that are predictable, we can manage that stress much better than we can when we have unpredictable situations and challenges and stressors just coming at us and coming at us. In this case, we know now that there are mechanisms involved that actually do cause us to have numerous health effects to unpredictable stress. This concept that was developed by Weiss and other people in researching predictability and control of stress is called the locus of control. One who has an internal locus of control feels that they have some kind of control and predictability over the stressors in their life. One who has an external locus of control does not believe that they have control over their life, or they are facing numerous situations in their life in which they actually do not have any control. And people with an external locus of control are more likely to suffer from the health effects of that. So I'm going to briefly summarize then animal research ethics. First of all, the research must be approved by the Animal Care and Use Committee at whatever institution is doing the research. The animal research must have transferable results to humans. So in other words, Weiss's research with rats did have transferable results in being able to look at how predictability can contribute to the amount of stress and physical problems that one might have as a result of stress. There is a lower standard for harm for animals than there is for humans. And however, we are to minimize harm to animals. We are to give them, for example, numbing agents if they are to be injected. The bottom line of this is that these standards are pretty subjective. Those who are closer to humans are going to be more protected in the research process. For example, primates are highly protected and are not subject to the same kind of harm that a rodent might be subjected to. Other animals that we anthropomorphize, in other words, animals that we give human attributes or qualities to, are more likely to be protected. So in the end, it is subjective. Of course, rodents are the most commonly used animals for research, and primate research will be done for things that are more observational in nature and will not involve harm to the animal. So that is the conclusion of our look at seminal research studies, and then both human research ethics and animal ethics. And these are all things that you will need to know. And I ask you to commit them to your memory. And thank you for your attention. It's not my preference to do lessons via Screencast, but in this case it was necessary. Thank you very much.